So the notion of authenticity, or as I am calling it, self-responsibility, reveals a moral urgency at the center of Husserl's philosophizing. Authenticity has both descriptive and normative dimensions, but it nevertheless remains divorced both from Husserl's discussions of the normative dimensions of axiology and his account of eudaimonia, a notion that in one way or another expresses, or should express, the end of our moral urgings. I've come to believe that Husserl's discussion of eudaimonia is insufficiently strong when thought in relation to his notion of self-responsibility. I shall claim that a more adequate notion of eudaimonia is available in the notion of self-responsibility itself, and that understanding the latter notion eudaimonistically positions us to enter a number of contemporary philosophical debates in ethics and metaethics. So the first section of the paper on self-responsibility. Husserl was concerned to articulate a notion of authentic reason as an antidote to the philosophical and cultural crisis infecting his world. This concern characterizes his thought as early as the Prolegomena to the logical investigations, and it endures through the crisis of European sciences and transcendental phenomenology. In the 35 years intervening between these two works, what Husserl had first identified as a crisis in the foundations of logic and mathematics became for him a moral and cultural crisis of reason in the broadest sense. In response to this crisis, Husserl develops a conception of reason that departs from the modern sense of reason in two ways. It severs the bonds between reason and scientific theory, and those between reason and rational procedure or calculation. In severing the bond between reason and scientific rationality, Husserl by no means rejects the rationality of scientific theory. Instead, he expands the notion of reason, insisting that there are other forms of reason as well, namely the axiological and the practical. They are not rational in exactly the same way that a theoretical science is, but they are no less rational in their own proper way. In severing the bond between reason and calculation, Husserl moves beyond a procedural view of reason to what might be called a teleological and intuitive or evidential account. Reason involves a striving for evidence, where evidence is understood as the experience of the agreement between what is meant and what is intuitively given. In the case of cognitive judgment, for example, evidence is the act in which I am aware of what Husserl calls the congruence, deco, between the sense of an assertion and the sense of the given state of affairs. Although Husserl devoted most of his energies to the discussion of theoretical reason, he nevertheless believed that in all three rational domains the aim of experiential life is the same, to live the life of intuitive evidence. While the evidential experiences for which reason strives take different forms in cognition and the theoretical sciences, in valuation and the axiological sciences, and in volition and the practical sciences, the task of reason is always to ensure in fulfilled experiences the truthfulness of our judgments about what is the case, about what is valuable, and about what is right to do. The telos of experience is truthfully apprehending things and state of affairs, having appropriate, effective, and evaluative attitudes towards those things and states of affairs, and acting rightly in response to and on the basis of our truthful cognitions and attitudes. This achievement of evidence truth in all the domains of reason is for Husserl the full exercise of reason. The term authenticity, or as I prefer the language of self-responsibility, but Husserl uses the term translated authenticity, Eigentlichkeit. The term authenticity is used to describe the experiencing agent who achieves authentic reason, that is, the agent who is rational in the full sense. An agent is rational in the full sense, according to Husserl, when she, in an evidential experience, quote unquote, decides for herself what is true, or when she, in the light of evidence, takes up the right attitudes and emotions regarding things, events, actions, and persons, or when she, in the light of evidence, decides what is truly good and what is rightly done. The contrasts are with the experiencing agent who merely accepts passively what others claim to be the true, the good, or the right, and with the experiencing agent who judges without evidence, who merely supposes that such and such is the case. In either case, the experiencing agent does not, quote unquote, decide for herself. The language of decision, however, can be misleading. It too easily suggests the Cartesian notion that when judging, one frames and entertains a propositional content and then affirms or denies that content in an act of the will. I think that this view of judgment is mistaken. Insofar as our cognitions, valuations, and volitions occur in the natural attitude, they share the natural attitude's belief in the existence of the world and its objects. In the case of judgments, then, whether judgments about what is the case, about what is good, or about what is the right course of action, the affirmation occurs in the articulating that is the judging itself, rather than in some decision that is added to the propositional content. The proposition as such arises only in a reflective modification of our original judging attitude, a modification in which we take the state of affairs as judged simply as a supposition. It is only at this point that the proposition as such is available to us and that we can reflectively and explicitly affirm or deny a propositional content belonging to the judgment. Now, what does this mean for the notion of authenticity or self-responsibility? Are we authentic only when we reflect and explicitly affirm or deny? If so, that would suggest that we are not and cannot be truly responsible in our straightforward judging, and to me, in any event, that seems an unhappy conclusion. So let us consider that issue a bit more closely. In judging in the natural attitude, our attention remains turned to the objective state of affairs rather than any logical objectivity that we might call the judgmental or propositional content, or more simply, the proposition. However, in those cases where we come to doubt the truth of our own judgments or of those reported to us by a speaker, we neutralize our acceptance of the judgment and critically reflect upon it by directing our attention to the judged state of affairs precisely as supposed in the act of judging. The judgment thereby takes on for us a double character. What is judged, the categorially formed state of affairs itself, and the proposition as such, the judgment in the logical sense, or as Husserl puts it, the supposed state of affairs just as supposed. The intended state of affairs and the proposition are properly distinguished, therefore, by means of a difference in the way we attend to the meant objectivity, as affirmed or as supposed. The logical domain first emerges then in this critical turn, occasioned by a concern with the truth or falsity of judgments. In the critical reflection on a judgment, we consider the proposition in relation to the state of affairs straightforwardly experienced. In critically adjusting our attitude, in other words, we remain attentive to the state of affairs intended in the original act. We engage in a certain reflection upon that state of affairs, upon the manner in which it is meant, and the adequacy of this meaning to the object's reality. Such critical or propositional reflection is therefore continuous with our natural concern with the way things are. The concern with truth is addressed, in other words, in the interplay between the critical and natural attitudes, between the proposition as such and the state of affairs, between propositional reflection and the categorical intuition of states of affairs. In the course of justifying our judgments, we become habituated to this interplay between the judgment as proposition and the judgment as state of affairs. And the adoption of the critical attitude and the teleological concern with the truthfulness of our judgments becomes part of the judging experience in the full sense. This habituated interplay informs even our everyday judging. And this, I believe, is the manner in which self-responsibility is realized even in everyday experience. It is in the transition from passively accepting beliefs that are handed down in tradition or communicated by others to the active taking over of a judgmental content as my own conviction, one for which I have intuitive evidence. Similarly, in the evaluative and volitional spheres, rational justification includes a reference to a moment of justifying intuition. And I might mention, apart from a comment by Husserl that a fully realized volition is an action, he really doesn't say very much at all about what justification in the axiological and the practical spheres would be. So in a sense, the rest of this paper is really an attempt to work out what justification in those spheres would be. So first, the axiological sphere. Evaluative experiences, according to a widely shared phenomenological view, apprehend the valuable in a moment of feeling or an episodic emotion that is founded on a presentation. I believe this foundational claim is better stated as follows. There must be distinguishable layers of sense within the founded noematic sense of the evaluation, such that a quote-unquote presentational layer, the layer presenting the merely descriptive features of the object, founds additional effective layers of sense. The significance of this more precise foundational claim is that the sense of acts that are not themselves purely objectifying must be founded on a presentational or descriptive content of the sort that belongs to a purely objectifying act. My reason for that reformulation, a kind of noematic reformulation of the thesis, is that I think it helps move us away from the idea that founded acts are acts piled on top of other acts, so we have this heap of acts going on all at the same time. And it also allows room, I think, for the view that most of our ordinary experience of things in the world is from the beginning a mixture of presentation, of effective response, and of practical interests and motives. And that moving to the merely cognitive is in fact a certain kind of abstraction from ordinary experience. Value attributes, then, are the correlates of feelings and episodic emotions that are the effective response of a subject with a particular experiential history, that is to say, particular beliefs, emotional states, dispositions, practical interests, and so forth, to the non-axiological properties of an object or situation. The value attributes intended are neither separate from nor reducible to the non-axiological properties on which they are founded. But our valuations, precisely insofar as they are grounded on cognitive presentations, track these non-axiological properties. Conversely, we can say that the non-axiological properties provide reasons for the valuation accomplished in the effective response. Value attributes, while disclosed by feelings or episodic emotions, exist independently of those feelings and emotions, at least in the sense that a thing's being valuable is not reducible to its being felt valuable. Rather, the valuable is that towards which the valuing feeling or episodic emotion is correct or appropriate. The intentional feeling or episodic emotion experienced by the subject is appropriate when it is rationally motivated by the non-axiological properties underlying it, and when the underlying apprehension of those non-axiological properties is itself both true and justified. By way of example, I evaluate a supervisor's angrily shouting at an employee as rude. My evaluation is immediately grounded in my directly witnessing this shouting behavior or in hearing about it from someone whose testimony is reliable. The shouting behavior rationally motivates my adverse affective response, say shock or indignation. The shouting behavior is a reason for my felt indignation and the negative evaluation of the behavior. In brief, in experiencing the shouting, I immediately and at once recognize the action as rude and disapprove of it. This evaluation, of course, depends on an understanding of what a conversational situation entails and of the concept of rudeness. Shouting is inconsistent with what the nature of conversation entails, and to resort to shouting does not conduce to realizing the ends of conversation. The evaluative moment is rooted in the underlying cognitive dimension and so thoroughly united with it, such that it is, as it were, a matter of fact that this shouting behavior is